March 1, 2022, meeting of Glens Falls Planning Board. We will begin this evening's meeting with the discussion and approval of the minutes from the February 1, 2022 Planning Board meeting. I'll start over here.
No comment.
Mr. Hall?
No, I'm good. Just going through them right now.
No comment.
No comment.
Okay, there are no changes, comments accepted, therefore I make a motion to Glens Falls Planning Board approve the minutes from the February 1, 2022 meeting. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Moving on to new business. Maple and Culvert Incorporated, owner of tax map number 303.17-19-13, commonly known as 153 Maple Street, is seeking approval to paint a 20-foot by 30-foot mural on the east side of the building at this location. Pursuant to City Code Chapter 180-6A, this application requires sign board review and approval. Before we get going, I have to apologize to the applicant. This application was noticed incorrectly in the paper. It was stated that the date on it was March 22nd and not February 22nd as it should have been. So we will not be able to vote on this evening. I apologize. But you can make your presentation and we'll do everything but vote on it and let you know. You'll know where you stand, so to speak. So if you want to come up. Sure. Just state your name and relationship to the application.
Eric Unkoff, owner of Maple and Culvert Inc.
Thank you. Again, my apologies.
Esmond Lyons, I live at 13 Garfield Street here in the city.
Thank you, Mr. Lyons.
So I think
Can we pass this around
or
first?
just hold it up or whatever you want to do. Hold it up.
Yeah.
They've got Esmond, they've got a small version that was sent by.
Yeah, that's a lousy version. And this is a lousy version because we're used to working big, not small. We all know that I like to work big.
Exactly.
I know, it's a complex, right?
Thank you.
So I guess I got a copy of Mr. Brown's critique on this, and so I wanted to address those issues. I own about 10 acres of old red brick mill buildings in the area. And what I can say about a brick is, if you've got water infiltration in through a broken weather cap or in through bad flashing or whatever, it's going to work itself down through the wall, and absolutely it's going to come out through the brick, it's going to cause the brick to spall. But in the 27 years that I've been at that property and on that east-facing wall, there's no evidence of any water infiltration, there's no efflorescence, there's no anything popping out. I mean, we would have to go in there and, to prep for him, there's probably some pointing we would do, not so much because the mortar is bad there, but because there was at one time a house conjoined on that wall. And some of the mortar joints are a little ugly because they didn't have the ability to strike the mortar joints because they were building, up against another building. And I went and I researched the city of Philadelphia has about 4,000 murals at this point that they put on buildings. And I would say 99.9% of them are direct to brick. There's no need to go with a separate panel system. And as a matter of fact, when I was talking to Esmond, and I said, Esmond, you've done a lot of murals, tell me. And the only mural that he had problems with was one that had been painted on plywood, okay? Because the other thing that is going to be an issue with plywood is we'd have to space it off of the building somehow to allow there not to be a cavity between the brick and the plywood where water is getting trapped back there and causing all kinds of strange stuff to happen. And then the other issue with plywood obviously is it expands, it contracts, it's gotta have a lot more physical movement than the masonry does. So in terms of having a stable surface to work from, I think the masonry, as long as we prep it correctly, has got it all over putting a separate piece up. Similar to what we did on the container and the trailer over at the Rock Hill property, I've got a guy that I rent to that does industrial paint finishes. And so I had contacted him and I was like, listen, I want the best available material to prime this and the best available material to paint this. I'm not gonna cheap out and go to Lowe's and save $50 a gallon on paint. I'll pay the $100 or $125 or $150 a gallon for the right paint, because if I put it up there, I want it to last. And I think we're all in the same agreement there.
I am so glad to
we
hear
would
what
like-
he's saying.
And so to tell you how long things last, there's an area of green on that east-facing wall. And one of the things that's nice about the east-facing wall is it really doesn't get direct sun except in the morning. It doesn't get weather, which is the big factor. Any other exposure is getting hammered at some point with rain and snow and wind and everything else. It's very rare day that you have wind blowing from the east, you know? It just does not happen. So I painted some green paint, just whatever random Home Depot, Lowe's garbage, 25 years ago on that east-facing wall, and it looks about as good as it does from when I painted it. The elevator shaft that's at that property was installed in the early 70s. The paint that's on that elevator shaft has been there for 50 years without a recoat and looks fine. So applying paint directly to masonry is not an issue as long as you use the right product and as long as the right prep work is done. And I'm not gonna chintz out on the prep work because that's everything. I've done lots of industrial painting, and the preparation is more important than the paint. As far as the thoughts about having some sort of something on the deed in terms of the property in relation to the mural, I have here the draft project agreement for the Glens Falls Public Arts Trail program that hit my email actually this afternoon, as it turns out. And although the Shirt Factory and Maple Street are no longer on the Arts Trail, it does discuss in here projects that are on privately owned property, which is going to include murals. So again, this is stuff you're going to come and see here in the next few months anyways, as these guys get together proposals and come forth. And nowhere here, nor any other, so the only places I saw where people were proposing a deed restriction on the property was if the city or municipality paid for the project to go up on the wall and took responsibility for that piece of art, both in terms of maintenance and, we paid for it, it's our money, we're gonna maintain it, but in exchange, you're gonna give us some sort of deed restriction saying you're not gonna go in there and paint over it or stick a sign in the middle of it or whatever. I understand that. This is a different situation. This is private money. There's no public money involved. As far as I'm concerned, God willing, I'm not selling the property anytime soon. That's where my machine shop is. I'm staying there for the foreseeable future. So, my whole shtick about the first ward there is, trying to improve things there. I mean, I'm constantly on the phone with Vanderzee telling them this, that, and the other, that needs to be done. So it's not like, I don't care as to what things look like there. So I guess that's, since you guys can't vote on it here, I guess that's me addressing Mr. Brown's concerns, and I'll certainly try and answer any questions.
Well, we're just gonna conduct our review as we normally would. Again, the only thing we're not gonna do is vote on it. So we will tell you whether or not it's acceptable. We will know that.
Right.
Coming back next month, we'll will be a formality, and you probably don't even need to come back,
Right.
depending upon what you hear tonight.
Mhm.
So, I just want to get that straight. So we'll let the public comment if they want to, and like I said, it's gonna be a regular
Right.
review, if you will. So, if you have anything else, that's fine, if not, we'll proceed.
I think that's everything. Do you have anything
I
more
just wanted to
say?
say that, it's been a long process, and I hope that, we're gonna finally get here, this year. I first proposed a mural to Roy Thompson, was it?
Thomas.
Roy Thomas. That was like 26 years ago.
Right.
And, it would be really great if we could finally get there.
Yeah, well, I think that
And we got a great guy here
is
working
that
for him, you
we've
know?
been supportive of other art projects, so to speak.
Mhm.
One notable one is on Broad Street, the
Bill.
Bill Electric, yeah.
Yeah, those
Yeah.
sorts of things, and some others were,
I think the other one that you brought into us that's going on the side of the one building there.
Eventually,
Eventually.
someday maybe.
so anyway, we tend to be this board as well, so favorably. So,
I kinda gathered that the last time,
Yeah.
and I just wanted you to know I'm grateful, thank you. Thank you, it's great that
So-
we arrived here, thank you.
So I'm gonna proceed. Are there any members of the public that care to comment on this application? If not, we'll proceed with our review. Our architectural consultant, Mr. Brown, you already,
Yeah, all I can add is, Roy Thomas's proposal was in a historic district, so it did not proceed. And I think that was the primary factor it didn't. But it was also a new idea, if you will. I think there was an existing fading, sign already there, and he wanted to kind of redo it. At any rate, I'm not concerned about the current owner maintaining it, but it's gonna be sold to somebody someday, and what's that person gonna get? Or what's he gonna have to deal with? So that was my question about not so much portability. I mean, you could, if you put it on some kind of panels and made it weather tight, you could take it with you, kind of thing. But my concern is the future of it,
maintaining it.
and I suppose, I'm not an attorney, but there could be a covenant in the transfer at that time to maintain it, if the new buyer wanted to.
The new buyer may want to paint over, you never know. It's,
Yeah.
We can't foresee the
If
future.
he paints over, you know, it's his job to decide whether he paints the whole side of the building to cover it up or whatever.
But I'm confident that the current owner, if he proceeds with this, will maintain it.
Yeah,
Have other dealings with it.
yeah, I don't have any concerns about that.
Okay, very good, thank you. Ms. Andrews,
I'm happy for public art.
Ms. Cullen,
I second that.
Mr. Hall.
Yeah, no, I'm fine with it. You know, Ed's been in front of us several times with different things that he's proposed, and it always comes out good. And Eric, the owner of the building, has obviously spent a great deal of time and effort in maintaining that building over the years, and it's certainly in a lot better condition now, Eric, than it was when you bought it. So I've got no issue with it.
Good. I had no comments from the city engineer, nor the fire department, or fire chief. So, like I said, unfortunately, and I apologize one more time for the record, we can't vote on this, but I think you get the sense that we would approve it if we could vote. Agreed?
Yes,
Yes.
So,
100%.
so we'll definitely do that at our next meeting, which is the first Tuesday in March, which are 8 months.
Ed, when would you be starting the work?
Not till warmer weather, not probably till, I would say, later May.
May, June?
Yeah, probably, I mean, last frost date here is May 19th, so
Yeah.
it'd probably be, the end of May it would start.
Yeah.
And how long a period to prepare it?
As soon as could rain for 2 weeks, so I can't promise you that, but I know that's what happened to us with the last one that we did, was that, we had weeks at a time where it was raining, and it was just like everything went to a halt, obviously, so it's, depending on the weather.
Gotcha.
Very good, so if there are no other comments or anything, I think that, like I said, you don't necessarily need to attend that.
Yeah, no, I'll be back.
Okay, that's fine.
I'll see you back again, but thank you.
All right. Moving along, we have one other item on the agenda. Which is, Wilder Walter, or as I listed here, Griffin Associates, they're gonna present information for review and discussion regarding the proposed Cronin high-rise facade renovation. This is a sketch plan review, there will be no votes taken. And we can proceed with that. Yeah, we should.
And I would make a motion to table, making Culvers Incorporated until March, until the April.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so if anybody who speaks, I need to have you identify yourself, your name and association with the project, the company, or in the case of public, your name and address.
Okay. I'm Bill Walter, I'm president of WBP Development. We're partners with the Housing Authority in the redevelopment of their portfolio. We're here tonight to talk to you about the facade of Cronin. We have our architect who's going to join in by phone. I think that since we submitted and you all have this package, I'm thinking what we'll do is not do it on the TV screen, but just use these boards.
Yeah.
And I'll have him just call in, we'll call him on speakerphone, and if we need to, we'll amplify him with this.
Sure.
Okay?
And if you want to turn those more for the public's benefit, that's fine too, unless you need them facing this way for your presentation, being that
Whatever.
that we all have these, are you in agreement?
Yes.
You okay with this?
Working in the round is always a challenge.
We have copies of those.
It's yours, he'll share it.
To get our technology set, we'll be right with you.
All right.
So in a moment, you're going to hear from Richard Metzke, who's a partner in Buyer Blinderville. He is the architect for the facade that we're going to talk about.
What was the name of the firm? I'm sorry.
Buyer Blinderville. And they're a frankly internationally known architectural firm that we brought in specifically to look at the facade in the context of other Glens Falls buildings, and he's going to sort of talk about that and walk you through the presentation that we submitted.
Thank you. If you want to take his phone, you can remove that microphone and set it next to the phone, if that works.
Richard? Richard, can you hear me?
Hey, Matt, hold on.
Richard, can you hear me?
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Can you all hear him?
I think so.
Okay, so this is Richard Metzke from Buyer Blinderville. And so, Richard, what we're going to do is go through the presentation that you prepared. Let me just open this up a little bit and explain, and then I'll hand it over to you, Richard. So this is Matthew Abrams from Griffin Associates. He is with our construction company. He's a senior project manager. Matt is running all of the construction in Glens Falls with the Housing Authority. And back there is Krista Thomas. He's our director of construction. He's also joining us. So what happened is when we were before your board in the past, frankly, a couple of years ago, we talked about the things we were doing, and we got approval from your board for La Rose, which we're in the process of rebuilding, and the Housing Authority also got the office building approved next door to Cronin. But when we were here, we didn't envision that we were gonna have the problems with the facade that we've been having. So we're roughly, let's say, about 75% done with the rebuild of the interior of Cronin, and in late August, early September, a piece of the facade fell off of Cronin. And as a result, we did a lot of investigative work to understand if it was an isolated incident or if it was a bigger problem than that. Frankly, we also looked at the other 3 towers in the same way. The other 2 towers. The other 2 towers are fine. But Cronin, unfortunately, is not fine, and we need to pull off the brick that exists on the building. So then we hired Buyer Blinder Bell, Richard Matzke was about to speak, to look at this sort of holistically from not just what do we care about for the building that we're doing with the Housing Authority, but how does it fit in the context of Glens Falls. So with that, Richard, talk loud, you're on speakerphone, hopefully they can hear you.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Hello, everybody. I assume everybody has the 11 by 17 presentation.
They do. No longer 11 by 17, but they have it.
They have it, okay. So let's go through it page by page, and I can start on page 2. Right? And as Bill mentioned, if you're on page 2, basically we looked at the sort of, we assessed the facade. And as Bill mentioned, back in August, part of the brick veneer had failed on the north side of the building. That failure was because water was infiltrating the building due to the lack of some proper flashing, especially at the relieving angles. There were failing soft joints, there were blocked weep holes, and there was limited expansion at the relieving angles. And what was happening was there was moisture absorption that was then happening through the brick veneer, and that ultimately caused the failure, and because of the deteriorating condition of those brick ties. And you can see some of the photos down below on the bottom of the page, just looking at some of the rust that was occurring at the relieving angles. You can also see that there was improper flashing at some of those relieving angles. You can see the soft joints at the relieving angles also, and that the soft joints are sort of falling out of the brick and between the brick, the mortar joints. The middle photograph shows sort of the brick anchor through the insulation. That was substantially deteriorated in many parts of the location where the brick failed. Weep holes were blocked up. There weren't enough weep holes. The flashing was inadequate. And you can see also that the brick went right up to the relieving angles, and so there wasn't any room for expansion, and that just created a lot of water conditions inside the building.
Richard, let me stop for 1 second. The point of why we're going to this level of detail is it's not like there's some problems with the brick. We can go in and fix it in any way, to do anything to keep the brick that's there. It's a systemic problem that we just have to start over again, basically. So that's sort of why Richard's going into that level of detail. So Richard, why don't you sort of just go on to the next slide? Okay.
So, we looked at, just to give you some idea of what about the existing building. It was a cast-in-place concrete building. The foundation was basically grade beams, which were between piles, and then there was post-concrete beams, columns, and a ground floor slab that was created. The exterior wall assembly was basically light gauge framing on each of the floors. With rigid insulation, there was inadequate actual airspace, and then the brick veneer on the exterior surface. The brick itself was sort of supported by relieving angles every other floor. Actually, the 3rd floor, the 5th floor, and the 7th floor had the relieving angles. And also there were issues with, and we'll talk about it in just a minute, with the replacement vinyl windows, and also leakage that was happening, and a lack of flashing at some of these vinyl windows in the building. So if you go to page 4, here's what we're going to need to do. As Bill mentioned, it's going to have to be replaced, right? And we're going to have to replace it with a lighter system due to the overall capacity of the building and the grade beams at the ground floor. We also don't want to vacate the building. We want to keep all the residents in place, which means we need a lightweight sort of system, which is going to enable all the occupants to stay within the building and to put up a new wall efficiently and quickly. So again, what we would then need is sort of a cold form sort of metal stud backup, this time the proper air and moisture barriers, the right insulation, and then put a new cladding system on top of that. The windows also need to be replaced. The windows, which were replaced at one time, they're currently vinyl, will need to be replaced with aluminum windows, which are better, have a better thermal performance, and will also this time have an AC sleeve for energy efficient, air conditioners. They're currently just popping out of residents' windows. So the overall benefit to, placing a new facade on the building is to absolutely create an energy code compliant envelope. And then, what would be obviously a more sustainable and healthier environment for the residents, and also will reduce the energy costs within the building and for the tenants. The other issue which we talked about was work has to progress fairly quickly. It has to be fairly efficient. The units are occupied, so we don't want to be disruptive to residents. So that's sort of the strategy and what we'll start to pursue in terms of the replacement of the facade. So the second part of the presentation, if we go to page 5, is the design portion. The first thing we look at as architects and planners is basically the overall context, location of the building, the overall context, its neighborhood, its open space, what it's adjacent to. So, on 5 is just an aerial view looking down. You can see sort of to the corner, you can see the building in the middle, of the photograph, Ridge Street, Warren Street, and Glen Street. That's, and Maple up above, all adjacent to the building. And then what we did is we sort of went around the building and sort of took a closer look at it and its context and its sort of Ridge Street neighborhood. And I think one thing about the building was it was absolutely sited correctly. It's not on the street, it was moved back, it has more of a park-like quality that surrounds it, which is great because you want that real buffer between our, Cronin and with City Hall. It also continues sort of the green space that surrounds City Hall and City Hall Park, and the green space that is on Ridge Street. So I think it's beautifully sited, it's correctly sited, and it has a sort of real sort of green and very soft edge around it. If we go to page 7, we sort of come down to the street, basically on Ridge Street. Just wanted to look at the building and how it's placed on the street. Just again, the same observations that the building is set back off the street. There's a nice green zone. There's a softness to it. It's set, away from City Hall. It looks like it's in a more of a park-like setting. So I think that's all very, very good. If you go to page 8, which is neighborhood photos, again, we just wanted to look at, the context that surrounds it, the buildings that surround it, the scale of the buildings, and actually mostly about colors and tonality of these buildings, the texture of the buildings. And so, the first thing was actually looked at Ridge Street and, City Hall right across the street, which is absolutely gorgeous. And then, when you're looking down Ridge Street to the south, it's got that really great sort of green edge to it. So there's some really beautiful, I think, things going on in the context and area that surrounds this building. And then if we go to page 9, the next page, sort of neighborhood photographs, we just wanted to look at some of the surrounding neighborhood and streets, just to get, again, the idea of the street wall and the buildings, and mostly the colors of the buildings. So, wanted to really understand the tonality of the buildings that were going on in the area that surrounds our building. And then if we go to page 10, we looked at, civic buildings, right? And there are, absolutely gorgeous sort of civic buildings in Glen Falls. On the upper left, whether it's the post office or the former high school, which I think is absolutely fantastic, and has actually a beautiful palette to it, in terms of its coloration. And to me, it sort of really sort of talks about, you know, upstate New York to City Hall right across the street, and to St. Mary's, which is a beautiful neo-Gothic, sort of collegiate Gothic building. So gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous buildings that are within in the neighborhood, and I think gave us a lot of inspiration in terms of its coloration and the tonality of these buildings, and how our building might start to interact with the downtown neighborhood. So then, you know, 11, as we were talking, page 11, as we were talking about sort of the color palette that we saw sort of downtown, you know, everything from the top row, which are, you know, a lot of Civic Buildings having that sort of really nice sort of golden ochre quality to it, and the middle, which is sort of the grays, to the bottom row, which has those more sort of deeper red, almost terracotta type colors. So there's a wide variety of colors that they all sort of are very complementary to each other, and I think that started to inspire us in terms of a direction that we might head in terms of how our building really starts to comfortably fit downtown.
So Richard, before you go on, I just want
Yes.
to say one thing. So the reason Rich has gone to this level of detail is that, you know, while we have developed in Ballston, and we're from downstate, and Rich is a New York City architect, their firm does work all over the country, but we wanted you to understand that what Richard's about to talk about is we really try to understand what we're starting with in the city. So even though it's a little bit exhaustive, we really want you to know it's important to us that you know that we spent the time to understand what's here. The other thing I want to mention is our partner, the Housing Authority. We have a lot of Housing Authority members here. You probably know them better than I do, frankly. We've been here working with them for a couple of years. I'm sure you know a lot of these people. But we've also, you know, this is from the perspective of your board. We understand that this building is very important. You know, it's you can argue whether it's an attractive building or not, but whatever we do going forward, it has to fit in with the city as best as it can. So I'm sorry that was so exhaustive, but we really want you to understand that we've spent the time to understand it. Okay, Richard, sorry to cut you off.
Let me just.
Okay, no problem.
Oh, sure.
then
So
we
one
start-
sec, Richard, one sec, yes.
Just so you understand, the members of this planning board have been inhabitants of this city, some of us all our lives, some of us maybe not. My point is, we're very familiar with all the architecture, because that's part of our job, duty.
Sure.
In other projects is to look at them, and we have, let me digress here a minute, we have on board our architectural consultant,
That's great.
and a member of the board is an architect, registered architect. My point is, we're very familiar with all of this stuff, and I appreciate where you're going, that you're trying to demonstrate to us that you put in your full due diligence. But just so you understand, this is part of what we do as a normal course of our duties, is look at things from an architectural, that's part of what we do.
Absolutely.
Planning and architectural review. So we're very familiar with all of this, so
Right. That's why I wanted you to know that we weren't doing it because we don't think you know your buildings. We know you know your buildings. It's that we wanted you to know that we've looked at your buildings as well, because you spent a lot of time here. Okay, Richard.
All right. Well, we want to do our due diligence too, and since, you know, the foundation also of our firm is preservation and adaptive reuse, doing our homework and really doing a deep dive into, you know, the city and its architecture is always important to us. So we're on page 12, and existing conditions. You know, just one observation that I had also is that the building itself has, it's very, very vertical, right? All the windows sort of line up, all the sort of piers all line up. That, you know, it's there's a large contrast between sort of the, you know, the grouped windows that are vertical, and that contrasts with the brick. So I think it creates a building which actually looks taller than it really is. And, you know, to me, there has to be a way of creating, I think, a sense of scale to the building itself, and to really minimize its sort of impact, I think, you know, downtown. So let's go to 13. Sort of started with a couple of just sketches, and I think, you know, for us, we felt that what we wanted to do was to have the building have a sense of scale to it. And one way to do that, I think, was to create more sort of horizontal lines through the building itself that really helps sort of almost individualize each of the windows. And it also sort of takes away from the sort of verticality. So there's more of a balance in the building. And I think that really sort of, in a way, helps sort of minimize the height, and I to a certain degree. And I think it also creates something which has a better sense of scale to it. So that was sort of our start. And then what we did is we created a model, a 3D model of the building itself. And I took the sketch and we sort of inserted it into this model. And what came out of sort of some of the studies that we had done and some of our observations in terms of the tonality of buildings and the color of buildings is that there's a nice sort of richness to the red bricks that you find downtown. There's actually a building, 79 Warren Street, just around the corner. I think it was recently restored. It's got a beautiful, actually darker terracotta brick. And its sort of lintels and some of the detail in the building has that sort of slate gray color. So that sort of palette to me was very much sort of had that feel of Glen Falls, and it was inspiring to us. So what we tried to do here was create complementary colors, right? Where it's a darker sort of it feels more of that sort of terracotta type coloration that you find around downtown. And then complement that with something that's not as contrasting, that really works nicely with that terracotta color, which is sort of a slate gray, a darker gray slate, gunmetal gray, slightly blue tint to it, which I think is very complementary and works nicely. The other thing we did is create those sort of horizontal lines to it. I think that sort of helps minimize, I think, the impact of the building downtown because it gives it a sense of scale. The other little sort of details all the way up on the cornice. The building has no cornice. It just keeps sort of continuing up. There's really no end to it. And I think maybe a little detail at the very top, little overhang, might really help in terms of sort of ending the building itself. And then if we go to page 15, just a little more of a detail on the ground floor. I thought it was important that there were these sort of three arches as you enter the building, the center one being the sort of front door, and they're rather deep. So it might be nice to have a little bit of a contrasting color on those three sort of arches, three sort of portals. And we also felt it was important to give the building a sense of arrival and a canopy. It has an awning now, but the issue with the awning, I think, is that these recesses into the front door is rather deep. And that awning is creating more of a sort of darker, deeper space. So I think if we could create a canopy that has more of a sort of polycarbonate top, so it's there's shading, but also allows some light to penetrate through it, would make a nice sort of arrival. Then what we did on page 16, just as an alternative scheme, I wanted to look at combining a couple of different colors that you see. I mean, one color, certainly see downtown as that sort of ochre, tannish color, with also the sort of more terracotta color, and then having a sort of complementary color in terms of the windows. So, it was just a scheme that started to create a little more color to it, and also in this case, sort of the horizontal bands were every other floor as a way of trying to reduce, again, some of the visual impact of the building. And then again, on page 17, we put it, did a three-dimensional model of it. And you can see this sort of combination of trying to create some of these complementary colors and colors that you do see downtown. So those were sort of the two facade options. I did notice, from Daniel Brown's report, and his observations and about Scheme 1, and I would actually agree with many of those observations in terms of how, 1 versus 2, 1 sort of helps sort of minimize the impact, I think, of the building downtown, and really blends quite nicely with the buildings that surround it, especially within this sort of more green open space. So, if you go to page 18, just a little detail of the building, again, at the entry, same sort of strategy, that maybe those 3 portals, as you approach the building are maybe a different color or a different material, and again, just having a sort of a canopy above the entry, which will allow some light to penetrate through. And so the last page, 19, which was sort of our little summary, was, as I mentioned earlier, the building to me, just feels, very, very vertical, very contrasty between the window bands and the brick bands. And then, option, whether it's option A or option B, trying to give the building a sense of scale, to really sort of soften, I think, its visual, impact downtown, to become almost a background building sitting in a park. And then we just had put a couple of photographs down below in terms of the color palettes. And you can see in option 1 at the very bottom, there's that building at 79 Warren, which I thought was absolutely terrific and a really nice complementary sort of colors to it in terms of its framing and windows and lintels. And then on B, the old high school and its sort of palette and how that sort of might have influenced a little bit.
Okay. Richard?
Option B. Yes.
Thank you.
Sure.
The one thing that you left out in Dan's letter, you had asked about what our plans were for the roof,
Penthouse.
the penthouse. So that is currently brick and it's done over block, so it's actually in fine condition. And it's got cell equipment all around it and on it, and cell
Yeah.
wires and everything. So I think our intention is to leave it the way it is, because it's just,
So that will stay brick.
yeah, that's gonna stay the way it is. That's what we're thinking.
Understood.
Yeah.
From the ground, you can't
You
see
don't
it.
see
Yeah.
it except from a distance, even if you're looking out.
Yeah, and we actually went up there about 2 hours ago to look at it, to understand how much equipment's there, because it's really surrounded on 4 sides with cell equipment and wires and boxes and such.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to close the loop on that.
Except that.
That's the reason we want to put it up there.
Sorry?
The reason we let them put that stuff up there is because you can't.
Yeah, exactly. So that's our presentation. This is sketch plan review. We understand that your board's not going to take any action tonight, but we just wanted to get to you tonight and then,
We encourage people to do this, unfortunately, most of them don't, on larger projects.
Yeah.
But, okay, so that's your presentation, we'll proceed with some questions.
okay, sure.
Let me first ask, are there any members of the public that care to comment? If not, we'll just continue with our board comments. We would normally start with Mr. Brown. Do you have any additional comments?
I will say, I expressed a preference for option 1 because it had more of a horizontal emphasis. But standing in the middle of the street, when I look at the city hall with its round columns and kind of irregular, and of course it's a different style completely. But its hues of light yellows and grays and so forth. And if I look across the street at this, say this building, at option 2, where we're repeating that pale yellow in corners and accenting the height of the building, if you will, I don't think the two relate, and I don't personally, as an architect, would miss those yellow corners on the building. Not that I'm trying to relate totally different kind of building to City Hall, which it faces. So I still favor option 1 because they're different buildings, and I like the open plane of the site. It's very seldom in the city you have that open lawn and field, and everything is just layered, if you will. And so that makes me still like option 1 as far as the board goes.
Okay, good. Thank you, appreciate that. Ms. Andrews?
I like option 1, I like the gray. But I hadn't seen the option with every other horizontal line. That actually is kind of interesting. So I don't know if that's a possibility, but.
Well, we could come back, because again, we have to come back anyway. So just to get rid of the suspense from what we think, and I think the Housing Authority, we actually think generally, I can't speak for everyone in the audience, but I think generally we like option 1 better too. So it's funny you said that, because the one thing I like about option 1 is I like the every other. So I was thinking that maybe what we can do for next month is start with option 1, but look at it every other as well, and show you both.
Sure. Other than that, I think it's great. It needs a little work, it's good, so
Great.
I'm glad you're gonna do it.
Thank you. We're also gonna detail the entrance more for next month.
Okay,
I would agree. I really, you know, looking at up here, and I keep glancing over there too, and I like option one, but I do like the every other in option two.
Okay.
is that it?
Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Hall?
Personally, I like the introduction of the gray, the gunmetal gray, the bluish gray, along with the red from the brick. I'm not opposed to the tan color, in option two. I like the fact that it's being used as an accent for the main entry on the red, on the option one version. I think I think it may become overpowering on option two. That's the only thing that I see. I think it would be interesting to see option one with the blue every other band as it is in option two. I think that could be quite. I think that could be quite interesting to see how that goes. The biggest thing that I think sets this off, two things jump out to me. The cornice at the top, the extension of that cornice, and even if, it looks like it might be 6 or 8 inches. Makes a huge difference over the pictures that we see. And again, 35 years I've been walking past this building, and it's kind of like, and you see it anymore because you've been looking at it for 35 years. And it wasn't until I started really looking at the pictures in that presentation portion of it that I realized that they're right, that building doesn't end. It just goes and there's nothing that stops it at the skyline.
Right.
So I think adding that cornice at the top is a nice way to kind of flare the top of it and end it. And the canopy at the interior, at the entrance way, I think that does a huge amount to set that part of the building off. And as you say, give it the, this is where you enter the building.
Right.
Because otherwise it's fairly obvious to those of us who have been here for 35 years or whatever, or all of our lives, that's the front of the building. But I think that this helps to set it off, and I like that as a feature. So overall, I think it's a really nice concept.
Can I just add one more thing?
Absolutely.
I just want to say I appreciate you guys looking at our city and taking into account the architecture that's in our city and not just every other city. So thank you for that.
Thanks.
All set? Just a couple of comments. Number one, what were the materials again?
So the materials we're proposing are EFIS system, which is based. Well, the first thing, let's back up. Richard didn't glance over a lot, but one thing he sort of glanced over was what we're doing is essentially putting a new exterior wall in front of the existing exterior wall, and that wall is going to be fully insulated wall. So it's basically a metal stud wall that will bear on the existing building. So that's good. We don't have to do a lot of destructive work. It'll be fully insulated. It will have new aluminum windows, and then it will have, as you can see in the drawing, the window part that's currently totally vertical will have windows. It'll have louvers that'll have the ability for tenants to have air conditioners in them that don't jut out into past the building. Over the metal stud exterior wall will be basically rigid insulation with stucco over that. It's called an EFIS system.
I'm very familiar with that.
And on the first floor of that, I figured, I said EFIS, but then I want to explain for those who don't know. It's a stucco, basically, it's a synthetic stucco system with basically on the first floor, it's a hard coat finish so that as any of you have seen when you have stucco, you have a lot of stucco actually in EFIS. Mm-hmm. And if you don't do a hard coat finish on the first floor, it gets banged, it gets damaged. Right. So the first floor, while they're both called EFIS, it's a very different finish.
Yep. EFIS stands for Exterior Insulation Finish System.
Wow. I think I knew that 20 years ago, but I don't think I remember.
But that's what I thought, and so I just wanted to reiterate that.
But the one thing, I'm sorry, I forgot one thing, sorry. We're thinking we're not going to do EFIS on the actual entry itself. This part that Richard was describing, we're going to probably do this with some sort of either a cementitious or stone product, because we really want to pronounce the entry in a way that isn't currently pronounced. So that's what this is. This is very generic. We'll come back with a real detail for next month.
Right, and I think it's a good idea on other projects we've recommended that something that's in close proximity to humans and whatnot be a little more durable.
Right.
Not that EFS is fairly substantial system, but that is a good idea. My other point is, you're in partners with the housing authority.
Yes.
Right? What's their view about all this? Do they have an opinion? Are they in lockstep with you?
So I'll say my piece and then can speak if I want to. We present, before coming to your board, because they're our partner, we actually went to their board and we did a presentation for them. And I think, we basically said, we need ultimately to get the city of Glens Falls Planning Board to approve this, but we wanted to go to you first. Sherry, do you want to speak a little about this?
Why don't you come on up here, Sherry? No, something like that.
Sherry Corey from the Glens Falls, Executive Director of Glens Falls Housing Authority.
That's just for our...
Thank you all. So the presentation, which was very well done and in good taste, was presented to the board a week or so ago. And it was favorable. However, the board is very interested in how the planning board feels and how it meets the expectations of the board and of course the city proper.
We appreciate that.
And so they're waiting to weigh in. It's all new to them. They need a better understanding of the materials that are going to be used and how it's going to support the building, what kind of interruptions is it going to have for the residents. Sure. Just so they're basically waiting to get your nod and to see how it goes,
But if we were to say, yeah, it's good, you're okay with that?
Wait, well,
Or,
right, and I won't speak on behalf of our board, and they've all taken a look and still have, there's the concern, the longevity, the disruption of the residents, how's it gonna, what's the end product gonna look like? Just all
I was
those.
just curious because you are a partnership.
Sure.
And we don't want to say yes to 1/2 or 1/3, whatever it is, I don't care, without getting the other part of the partnership, getting their input, so.
Yeah, we appreciate that, and so I will regroup now that they've known, and when will they be able to see the video of the meeting this evening? Do you public?
10 minutes after we're done.
Okay, all right, good, because there were a few members that were unable to attend.
Goes right to what, YouTube? Or?
Yes, it's live. It's live on YouTube, 10 minutes later after we're done.
Okay, great, and then I think, in our March meeting, they'll be ready to form a little more opinion, have a more discussion about it, and feel more comfortable, because after all, it was just presented to them as well, just as it was to you folks, so.
And I also want at least our consultant and hopefully our board member architects to scrutinize this a little more and see, how it stands up. If there are any other materials, that sort of thing.
My opinion on the drive, have you chosen a manufacturer or thought about manufacturer for the EIFS system?
Is that gonna stay? Oh, okay.
So we're doing 2 buildings in downstate right now with two systems. I don't remember the manufacturers, but we'll look at that and we'll give you details at the next meeting.
Over the years, and I've done several buildings where we've used EIFS on the exterior as well, and it holds up very, very well if done properly. And really that comes down to the install.
Right.
And a lot of them now have rain screens that are built into them,
Right.
that get the moisture away from the building, which is ultimately what we're trying to do here. It definitely, insulation is in the name of the product. So it does definitely add a higher R value to the exterior of the building, which the building code requires that.
Yes.
Requires that separation of the exterior from the stud itself. You said you're creating a secondary cavity that'll be insulated as well.
You want to speak about that? Sure.
So I'm Matthew Abrams with Griffin Construction. So
Yes.
what we're going to do is at each floor there's going to be a relieving angle installed, either replaced or put a new one in. We'll use light gauge metal framing, frame that system, and then put the EFS to that. That space, that void that's created, will insulate that as well. Then put our rain screen on, then add the EFS finish.
Got it on the outside, so
Yep.
my only concern was there being the double insulation with a void in between it. That's a good spot. That's the problem that the brick has right now, is you've got a void in there that's got insulation on one side and nothing on the other, and that's where your
So we'll
condensate is coming.
Correct. We'll pull that rigid insulation that's there now, the existing 1 inch.
Yep.
And if we have to pull the existing insulation in that cavity
In the
wall,
cavity
we'll
wall.
pull that out too. If we find that it's,
Been compromised?
Yeah, been compromised.
I will bet you solid money, as soon as you pull that off, you're gonna find a lot of wet insulation back there.
we'll have some more things to replace.
Exactly. So, and again, my opinion of EIFS is if it's installed correctly, it holds up very, very well. We've had buildings that are going on 40 years that we've done it with. And, Stowe was the original manufacturer of that. And they got to be the guinea pig, and they found all the problems right off the bat. So, it's come a long ways.
Yes.
And it's a much better product now
Yeah.
than.
We've installed a building, the first building we did with it was more than 30 years ago, and buildings in Poughkeepsie, New York, in another area that's pretty cold, and it's done fine with lots of wind. But it absolutely is about the installation. We'll provide, obviously we'll need a building permit, so we'll need to provide full details when we submit for building permit. And we will coordinate with the housing authority prior to your next meeting. As Sherry said, they have another meeting before now and then. So there's some things that pertain to your board, other things that don't, but we'll completely coordinate with the housing authority.
Sure. One of the other things that and we were kind of talking amongst ourselves as you were giving the presentation, the blow up, the close-up version of the drawing, it almost looks like there's horizontal bands. Is that the printer that did that, or is that?
So horizontal
You're
frame.
talking about,
I'm looking at number 18. Page 18.
Look at the gray.
yeah, I don't,
And the red.
yeah, I don't think the intention is to go with horizontal bands. I think if you look at page 15, I think that's more of the look that we're thinking about.
Should be that traditional drive-in or EFS finish.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's not.
Yeah, the
Okay.
vertical lines didn't show up on this.
Yeah. So I think that, so what we're doing on page 15 I think we'll do, but below the windows, that's the louvers I was talking about.
Yeah. No, I was just wondering if it was the printer that made the horizontal bands, or if it was and I think that's a nice element. So I like the fact that it's the flat as opposed to the scarred
Right.
edge, because the scarred edge is again much more labor intensive. You got to be right on the money putting that stuff.
Yeah, and I think just as an installation detail, I think it's a riskier detail, frankly.
Yep.
So I think better the way on
Yeah.
page 15.
Yeah, I do too.
And on the awning, I can ask you one question about the awning, because we think it's a very important thing.
Mhm.
It's a very sleek awning if you compare to what's there. It's sort of modern, but we actually thought it was appropriate. Are you all right with that concept of that awning?
In my opinion, yes. I like that.
Peter Hoffman's.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have others.
A lot of Peter Hoffman's buildings around the city have the same type.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yeah, I've seen,
he's redeveloped.
I don't know him, but I've seen some of the awnings.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay.
he does very nice development.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the last thing I wanted to talk about, just hold it, is, our goal was to have this never happen, but we're here and we have to do it. So our goal now is to make sure that we start the construction in time so that we don't have to go through next winter and have that. So our goal hopefully is to answer all of your questions and have you in a position where you can consider a vote on this at your next meeting. You'll obviously do what you want to do, but that's what our goal is. So please tell me,
Right.
in terms of an installation of what we have to submit, we'll submit everything we talked about. We'll coordinate with the housing authority. Is there anything else that we should be doing that I'm not thinking of?
I was going to tell you that in order to be on the agenda for the April 5th meeting, you need to have everything in by March 16th, the third Wednesday of the month.
Okay.
We have to have that. We have to have time to distribute the materials, do reviews and stuff like that. So
Legal notice.
What?
And the legal.
Yes.
Okay. We'll get it in.
But, we'd like to see, and I'll let anybody comment, one of the things we'd like to see the actual material.
Okay.
So we need to see a sample in colors. Don't forget that. So most importantly, colors, sample the material itself. I don't know if you need
The window as well,
windows.
the window.
Like a catalog, cut sheet on the windows.
A cut sheet on the window, okay, we'll do that.
No, they can preserve, I think
Is
that's
there
absolutely.
exterior lighting?
On the building now,
There
it's,
currently is now, yeah. So we'd probably look at, we were upgrading it regardless to LED lights. We'd probably look to update those to a little bit more sleeker look to match the
So we'd like a
building.
cut sheet on any,
Do they have to be, so like what I think what the housing authority was trying to do was tie in, obviously, the cityscape as well, right? The acorn designs. Is that acceptable to upgrade these lights on this building to a little bit more modern look?
Sure.
Okay, all right. So
So you
we'll
got
get,
that cut sheet?
yeah,
Okay.
we'll get a cut sheet on that.
okay with that?
Yeah.
Are there any other items that you want?
No, I amplify Ethan's comment about the entry being an accent color. And also add that, you know, with the roof cap, so to speak, as a visual concern, the ground floor being that gray color, you've got the base and you've got the cap, and everything in between are lighter lines and so forth. I think it comes off very well.
great.
So if you have any, or not if you have, we'd like to see some final architectural rendering or drawing, something with some dimensions on it.
Okay,
Okay.
great. So that we have the best chance of getting this right, is there someone we can show the plans to ahead of submitting them to make sure that, for example, either of the architects on the board, can we just sit with one of them and show you our submission before we submit it?
You okay with that?
Yeah.
That would be
Three
great.
of us, we can't approve it, but.
Oh, of course.
We're happy to sit down
Yeah,
and help them along.
that would be great, okay.
So whenever you're ready, give us a shout, or just let me know,
Okay,
and give us a couple of dates and all.
perfect.
Is there a sign for the name of the building at all? Because signage is another, signs and lights or two.
So there currently is a sign for Cronin High Rise on the street. There is one affixed to the building as well. I think it's a smaller sign. We probably would want to reuse that because of the historic nature of it. That's something we'll show on the renderings as well. Will that be part of the approval process?
Yeah, signs and lighting.
Okay, signs and lighting, okay.
Parking's not particularly an issue, but is there access in the back as well? I'm not familiar with the building.
So,
There's actually quite a lot going on in there now, but I don't know what's,
Yeah, there's parking there now, and we're not changing.
right. But there's a lot of stuff going on. I just don't know offhand.
We're under construction, so there's still plenty of stuff going on.
Right.
There's parking on the east side, the parking lot, there's parking lot on the south side, it wraps
It
around
wraps around
the
it.
east, and goes all the way across the back of the new administration building, but that part is reserved for those people. So there's parking behind what you see here. On the east side, there's parking along there, and there's parking on the south
I
side.
wasn't here for the first go around of this.
But,
so these perspective views that we have, this is what we'll update.
yeah, that's fine. And when we meet, we should probably include maybe, Ms. Corey or somebody from there, just, as a courtesy. Is that you okay with that? So, let me know, and I'll get Mr. Hall, Mr. Brown together. And we'll see.
Terrific. Okay, thank you all for your time, I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna get this in right.
Yeah, I think that thing is turned upside down, that's what it is. Maybe.
You're right. That's why you're chairman.
I'm an engineer. You guys are, I'm an engineer.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I'll try that.
Okay, thanks.
How do we get this off?
That's
It,
I give up. Okay. Thanks.
Look forward to meeting with you.
Thank you very much.
You have to be authorized.
Do you?
I would say yes. But there's three categories of drones, not the matters. You can't fly a drone, that is what you call assemblage of people. Because they don't want to fly over. Or
Walk downtown and meet people.
Yeah.
They're all, there's that, they're all
My kid got one for Christmas, he got, my kid got one last year for Christmas, so 2020. And he took off without practicing, and it landed in our neighbors, like 3 or 4 houses down. And I had no idea who they were, and they were like, until I get back there. My other kid had to throw a football at it, because it was stuck way up high in the tree.
good videos of the class 3
So it's like an overload.
can lift 500 pounds. That's 500.
Oh.
But that you have to have 300 pounds.
Yeah, he's got it.
I do a little, I'm kidding. But, anyway, what I'd like to do is look over the, proposed modifications, additions, whatever, to the, code 220, and get any comments, get that to the county council, and talk down, whatever they want to do. But I'm going to give you, for some reason, the last 3 pages were not included in your copy.
Can I prevent people from using a big, leaf blower?
What's that?
Can I prevent people from using a leaf blower to snow?
You can try.
I got the last few days.
Oh, do you?
I did not.
Shit, tell me about it.
Oh, yeah, it is there. Mine is, I marked it up.
Oh, okay.
Can I ask you one more question? Sorry.
Absolutely.
Just quickly, is it okay for the formal meeting if we don't have architect come up? I don't think you need him again. We're good?
You don't need them,
Okay. I didn't think so, just making sure. Thanks.
they're dispensable.
I love architects, but.
Not me.
You don't have to say that on behalf.
Okay. I'm just gonna go through this page by page,
Solid copy.
see if you have any comments. And actually,
To produce that paperwork, it's close to 20.
this is more to see if you have any comments from me, because if you have comments, I'd like them in writing, or you can email them to me, any suggestions. But, so the first page here, these are definitions.
Mhm.
Okay. So,
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
Did the county determine anything about what they want to do with Airbnbs?
Oh, did they
Yeah.
determine?
Have they made a determination on that?
As to,
Was
The
this part of
county-
the bed tax?
What's that?
Was that part of the bed tax?
yes. It's the
They were looking at the
occupancy.
short-term rentals.
Yeah.
I don't think they passed
No.
anything yet.
Because that one house on Glen Street that was wanted to run as an Airbnb,
Right.
we had questions
But
about.
that doesn't, that is not allowed per the current code.
The Airbnb.
That's my understanding.
At all?
No, they have to be registered.
Right.
Well,
There are plenty of them in the city, they're all
They're
registered.
registered.
That's right, I'm sorry, you're right. There's something about that one.
Well, I know the common
Oh,
council.
I know, it's zoning.
Yeah.
In other words, you have to have them in the right location, or that did not fit in that zoning classification.
Okay, so, yeah, okay. So, but the county has not done anything as far as short-term rentals yet?
And that's a problem because of the neighbors, as you can well imagine. People like, for instance, there was a number of them on, like Sunnyside, where you got some rowdy people in, and, you know, they come in, who do they know? Nobody, so what do they care? I'm
Right,
just being
right.
blunt. So it is it's a concern, it's not a problem, and all the county's not taking a stand, so to speak, to create anything like that. But I'm sure it'll come to a head again, it's been nice weather, vacation time, and all that.
Yeah, I mean, that's,
So, they have the definitions, but again, if you have any, I don't know if you have any comments, so these, just to give you background, I don't know if I did, but we started this over 10 years ago.
oh,
The idea was, we knew that the chapter 220 needed some updates, some modifications, additions, and in an effort to save the city money rather than go out and hire someone as they did for this version.
40 years ago.
Yeah. We said, we thought the board would undertake, because, quite frankly, we weren't talking about wholesale changes here. That's where I caution members on to begin with, it's not that onerous, we're not gonna rewrite this whole thing. So that was the idea to try to help the city. Now, when this gets submitted, the common council has the final say on whether they could take the whole thing and throw it in the garbage, like monthly. Or they could take parts of it, or they could take all of it, so yeah, these are great ideas, just so you understand. And, we had some meetings and stuff, and to be honest with you, I didn't get an awful lot of input, but I did get some, and so I took what I got, like I said, it did drag on, and sat down with our acting city attorney, Mr. Fitzgerald, and I spent a lot of time going over this and kind of formalizing it. So that's what you have in front of you, and as I said, if you hopefully look through it, I don't know if you have many, if any comments, but I wanted to go over it with you all before I did anything.
just so I understand, on 22021, on high industrial districts, removing restaurants, would that include trucks, food trucks?
Which one, you know, sorry.
On page 3,
Yeah.
about halfway down, amend to remove taverns and amend to remove restaurants, would that include food trucks at heavy industrial sites?
And then to move restaurants.
Well, I think the food truck is not a permanent structure.
Right, we're
Right.
talking permanent structures rather than no food allowed for some reason.
Right. No, it was just so we didn't have those in that district,
Right.
heavy industrial.
where is, where's the heavy industrial zone?
It's down toward,
Roger Street, these,
There's,
down toward the river.
yeah.
See, we usually have your,
It's here. See this? It's all, yeah, right, the darker
oh,
purple.
down
does it cross,
by,
whatever road that is, River Road, where Warren Street turns into River Road? I have to take a look at it.
Well, that becomes town.
Ah.
You're talking about here.
Okay,
Civic Ivy.
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right, there's see the changes.
No, it changes into cement plant.
Oh, okay.
City line, so
It's
like
all
IBS.
along the river,
IBS is in the.
except that some of this, what this shaded portion indicates, floodplain where you can't go into it.
but would that impact, well, I'm just thinking of like, is it Rachel's? The restaurant on the east end, the Rachel's
Oh.
Spice,
Yeah, with,
No,
Where
that's
is
in
it
there.
located?
is that,
it's across from the,
Nate, you'll manage, don't you?
well,
Texas
yeah,
State.
across from
Shermantown.
Shermantown.
Yeah,
It's right next to the open door,
so that's,
or just on the street, the open door. So, no, that falls into, that falls into the cultural.
okay, so it's up here.
Yeah.
And anything that's pretty,
That's Warren Street, so it's actually Oakland Avenue and south.
Okay, alright.
So So cultural professional is where the hide is.
Oh, well, even.
Anything pre-existing would stay, but they could not ever expand or modify or alter, and I don't.
Without a use variance.
Right.
What about the gentleman who had come to us the last meeting, I think, and the
The hot dog
taco,
stand.
yeah, the taco restaurant.
That's in the light industrial.
Right.
I mean,
So-
industrial mixed.
Okay.
These also, I mean, these things haven't been enacted, maybe they won't be adopted.
In light industrial, you've got to amend to delete restaurants, and I'm trying to, in my head, I'm trying to figure out why wouldn't we want a restaurant in a light industrial area if people are working there and want to scoot out for lunch? I don't know.
Yeah, I
Why
think it
doesn't
had
that
more to
fit?
do with the development, the use of those properties for the intended purpose, which is, you know, light industrial, heavy industrial, which are more job producing, et cetera. I think, but if you don't want it, you know,
Well, that's, yeah,
the
like.
town council,
kind
they
of
can go,
goes-
yeah,
like it
same
does.
thing that Ms. Judd said. We don't want to do that.
And that, you know, I don't, so I understand that, and but I guess for me too, like I feel like the East End gets shafted a lot in a sense of like they lost Price Chopper, right? So like they don't have that anymore, and I guess I don't wanna necessarily limit businesses that much. Like I understand heavy industrial, I'm just,
Yeah, that's fine.
I have a little bit of a reserve on light industrial, like I understand the
Like I said,
thought behind it.
whatever specific comments you have, if you need
Okay.
something, just email those to me.
Okay.
And then, we'll see what I do.
Because I have to do it with the map right there, and then
Yeah.
like check the addresses and stuff, because it's so specific. It's, the east side is all, particularly is all cut out.
Yeah. You can do that.
That's where I live.
Yeah.
And they want, what was the reason to limit or prohibit new residential uses in the light industrial?
Again, the same reason,
Keep it.
a good example is,
Well,
Taxes?
because we're having conflicts between neighbors. People living in light industrial areas are having trouble
Sure.
with their
they
neighbors
claim-
that are there operating in a light industrial area, which they're allowed to be.
Right.
right,
So-
so if you didn't allow them, you'd eliminate some problems. Additionally, the big one, and I'll cite an example, the development on Cooper Street, which I'm okay with, except that it ate up a lot of good light industrial property.
Yeah.
The purpose and intent of the zoning is to get certain things built, certain areas, or allow them, or not allow them. And in this case, we really would rather have had, the city would benefit more from having that property be used for the intended purpose, which is light industrial.
Right.
So that's a big part of it too.
Yeah.
But
No, that makes
again,
sense.
it's up to the,
And does that just mean building or use of of a building that's existing? Like, if, say if Rachel's closed down and somebody else came in there, would they not be able to start in a,
they would, that's,
it's not new construction, but it's.
no, but does the use travel with the property?
Right, that's what I want, I don't know what the.
Well, yeah, I mean, it does.
Mhm.
Yeah. So if someone has a restaurant and they close and they sell it as a restaurant, it's not a new use.
Right, okay,
It's just
okay,
tenant.
so
Right, it's a new tenant.
But if they wanted to change,
If they wanted to
they
change
would
it,
have to conform to the
sell
zoning.
widgets instead of a restaurant.
Oh, some of these places that are churches on Warren Street, there's been a couple of storefront churches that are
Mhm.
next to the, Children's Museum and
And
stuff
they
like
came
that.
here, they came here.
Right, but at one other time, they were something else.
Yeah.
Right,
Right.
They were a gym.
commercial,
It
yeah.
was a gym.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one of them was.
Right.
And we had the one down on the corner, was it Locust and Warren, or, the one across from the Armory, there was a
Right.
church that went in there temporarily.
Yep, for sure.
They came
Yeah,
here.
now they're in the old, Lazarus building.
Oh, are they?
That's where they're now.
As long as it's not a change of use, change of tenant, but change of
No.
use, they'd have to come in.
Right.
And tenant can mean owner versus renter, is tenant is
Correct.
tenant, okay.
the whole light ordinance thing that's being, it just kind of jumped up here recently because it was.
Are you familiar with it at all?
No, that's why I'm
Yeah,
asking.
it's,
There's an ordinance under consideration that, the problem was,
You mean light pollution, is that the?
Yeah.
it's, well, it's,
Light trespass.
it's
yes.
in
nuisance
residential.
lighting,
Right,
I call it.
right,
Like
right.
your
There's
neighbor
security
puts-
lighting that's crazy, and then there's the street lighting, which is, yes. yeah.
Right, so your neighbor puts a spotlight or a couple of them on the side of the house that shines right into your window, you know, like,
I live on Market Street, and when they took down all the trees and built the parking lot, now their security lighting is in my window.
Yeah.
So I have my blinds full all the time.
you could,
I mean, the light was already there, they didn't add it, it just, the trees are
right,
down, and
but
so.
now that the trees are gone, you could talk to them and say, you know, angle it, put
Angle it down.
a shade.
But the whole thing boils down to, there's no method of enforcement. That's the problem. We have nothing on our books regarding light and how it goes. The issue that has come up, and I was contacted quite frankly by several members of the public that said, was the planning board consulted upon this? Nope, never came to us
Was the
and asked.
Building and Codes Committee.
Never asked the question
The
once.
board supervisors involved in buildings and codes started meeting, I think, back in September in response to a lot of neighbor complaints. And then initially, the city clerk drafted a law, and then we had more workshops, and we've amended it. And now we're still in public hearings and.
Is trees also being considered, because they've taken down a lot of trees on Dix
So
and.
this is just the lighting,
Just the
proposed
lighting.
lighting law.
Because the trees is the other thing that they changed a lot, down.
We used to have a tree commission.
We still do.
Still do.
Still do?
It hasn't met in about 5 years, and I'm serious.
It what?
Has not met in 3, 4, 5 years.
They used to come in
I just
front of.
talked to one of the members today.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they used to come in front of the Recreation Commission and talk about it, you know, at the public properties. But then when they cleared off Dix, all the way from the end of Dix, all the way down to the East Field, there's, you know, trees and.
Well,
Oh,
anyway,
that was all.
Right, but are they gonna replace any, that is that, because it's noise and sound, noise and light and dirt, you know, that it helps.
I'd like to stick with this, otherwise. Those are good comments, and I don't mean to be rude, but.
But trees are not, the commission is not part of it, it hasn't come before this board either. Okay.
They're their own.
Right.
So,
Do we know anything about, so I'm on page 5 with the cannabis in general, do we know anything that they have started?
The city did not opt out.
Right.
The state has just formed their board.
Okay,
There's been very few regulations put out by New York State.
okay. Alright.
I think the state is treating it very similar to bar or retail store that sells alcohol. Because you have your on-site use facilities, and then you have your dispensaries.
Right.
So they're being treated similar to a liquor store versus a bar.
Okay.
We have no idea how many licenses or permits will even be given, if Glens Falls will even be given a permit or license.
Yeah. Oh, so that's not.
So it comes from above rather than us, okay.
Correct.
And they didn't opt out, so they will now be considered.
Oh, yeah, the city did not opt out.
Right, so which meant they automatically be considered.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to,
Like,
well, no, it's very similar to, the liquor authority. If you
Right.
wanna open a liquor store, it's an 18-month process to get approval
Well,
from.
and they don't even have all the regulations, some are, but
Right.
the law has been passed, but the regulations have
they-
not. The board just
they
got
jumped.
much,
formed,
much more difficult.
the application process,
Yes.
And alcohol,
right.
much.
Well, the city did not opt out. I think the rationale from the last common council was if you opt out, you lose out on all the tax revenue.
Right.
And if you have more issues or problems because of the cannabis, you have no tax dollars to help assist or educate.
Correct. Correct, because it's going, you know, I mean, it's
It's
already.
going to happen everywhere else.
It's
around
already
here.
happening. Like, there are times where I'm like, oh, I'm in San Francisco. Yeah,
In Vermont.
yeah, no.
New York City,
Oh, yes.
they have the trucks on the street corners, they sell them, like a food truck.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Pretty
it's,
good.
They do.
you smell it everywhere now.
Yeah, the bulk use
Yeah,
table.
but that's only part
I
of
know.
it you can't smell. The chewy, the gummies,
Yeah,
Edibles.
edibles.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, which is very strong.
Yeah, and evidently really common.
So,
Yeah, I didn't have any other issues.
all right, so, and I don't mean to rush anybody, but whatever you have, if you have anything, please email it to me before the next meeting.
Okay.
Like a week before the next meeting. And, we'll take
Otherwise,
it from there.
otherwise, I think we've kind of been over it so many times. I think this is a good
Actually,
summary.
we started working on this when I was deputy city attorney, and I have not been involved in city politics for 6 years.
Yes.
Dr. Doyle used to do all the, remember?
Mhm.
Had
I
flash
can show
drives,
you
thumb drives.
my notes
Yeah.
and the dates on them, but I won't. It goes back to before 2010.
2000, yeah, you said 2008, 2009.
Yep, exactly. Were you there?
Yeah. And then I wasn't there,
Yeah.
and now I'm back.
Do you have in here, so I just,
Yeah.
forgive my ignorance on this, so specifically when we were talking about the patent project
Yep.
and the amount of square footage that needed
Density.
for.
The density.
The density.
So is that,
Density.
That's a
okay,
good
so
point.
that's
Talking
in
about
there,
the density.
okay.
I think the city would like to see an amendment to the density requirements.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, I just
And
wanted.
then there's a difference, one section talks about square foot and the other talks about gross floor.
Gross floor.
It's a different
Yeah.
That needs to
interpretation,
be
so,
uniform.
right, and less.
And we also, I think I put something in here, we had a situation a year or two ago, no, 5 years ago or more, about the amount of the lot coverage in the light industrial or heavy industrial, just doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Why you would limit in that zone.
To 30%.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It was the
that's
Art
good.
West Ethics Avenue.
That was one, and then we had the one that we were looking at down on Pines Island,
Yes. So,
where the building pretty much covered the whole lot
right,
already.
and what's the problem with that in a heavy
In an industrial zone, you ought to be able to cover pretty much all of the lot, you know,
Kind of
that's why it's an industrial zone,
Right.
you know, I guarantee you.
So the point is it limited some development there, because, you know, somebody comes in and wants to build a, say, a manufacturing.
Which that's where you want to go.
Exactly, but you couldn't, because the site couldn't accommodate it due to limits on site coverage. Right.
No, I agree. And again, I think this, having read through it now several times, I think that this is a good summary of all the items that we've been through over the years.
Okay, so, the last thing, just back to, the facade replacement, if you will, from, you're all okay with what they're proposing, pretty much?
I liked it. I really appreciated, like I said, I really appreciated the thoroughness of it.
Yeah.
Like taking into account what is already here.
Yeah, I just want to make a point, Daisy, you know, we are very familiar with the
Right.
architecture here, but it was good that they
Yeah,
were.
what color is the small building? The new administrative building, that gray?
Gray.
It's gray.
Gray and
So
what's
the gunmetal that they're, and it's a kind of a blue gray, so
Mhm.
the blue gray that they're talking about using on the bottom is gonna complement that, it's gray
It
and
looks
white.
better than the yellow color.
Yeah, I think the yellow was, and it's really hard, yellow was a really hard color to
It
match.
is.
And, you know, it's almost harder than red, and
I think they
he was
did
talking
that as a compliment to City
to
Hall.
City Hall, and I don't think that they need
Doesn't
to.
work.
No.
No.
You,
And
I agree with you, Dan.
they,
Yeah, they're different animals.
yeah, they're
I
not
can
even.
imagine a strip of yellow,
Well, that's why I said I
but
liked
the
it.
whole
I
area.
liked it right
was
at I liked it right at the main entry.
Right,
I
right.
think that highlights the main entry and
Yeah.
it sets that apart from the rest of the building.
I like the light gray, light gray, blue grays. The
All right.
awning, the new canopy's nice, it reminds me of Peter Hoffman's property.
Well, and that's, you know, I mean, they are two different buildings and that, like, people live there, you know, so you don't wanna make it.
Still being recorded, so